Now I've just put the pump back in the casing. A little bit of difficulty. I mean, I tried to use the jack to support it, which helped a little bit, but the key to getting it in is that you angle it up towards the front. You've got to put the front up in first, and then you can get the jack under to support it. To finally get it in, because I struggled underneath for quite some time until I actually got up the top and, you know, just put my hands, pull that out of the way, put my hands inside and pulled it up into position from the top, and that was a lot easier, and then it just went into position. Getting the gasket to line up with the holes is another thing to be careful of as well. So it's all in. You have to torque it from the front end first, and I'd say the reason for that is that that's the feed pipe comes up on this side of the tractor at the front, so to the ram. So I'd say that's why you clamp it up to the front first. Anyway, it's in, so that's a good start. I'll just work on the ram now and get that installed, and then put the top on and connect it all up. Now with the hydraulic ram, as I said, it had some scoring inside. What I did was to run a light hone through the bore just to make sure there were no raised sections on the scoring. That seemed to work alright, and the piston, I put that in the lathe and ran some very fine emery over the top, once again to make sure there was no scoring that was raised that might cause further damage. It's got new rings, so that should improve its operation. The old rings were quite worn. I haven't torqued these bolts up yet, but I'll wait until I put the case, or put the unit back on into the case, and you have to start tightening the front bolts first, and the reason for that is the oil feed comes up through this end. The gaskets are put on dry, no gasket sealant goes on them, and they're just torqued down. Same with the top gasket here, that's just a straight torque down. This control fork is slightly modified from the earlier ones. It has this little cage in place. Now you find that when that's in place, bolted in place, trying to separate the forks to remove the control valve becomes a real problem. You actually need to take that off, and then you can spread the fork apart to actually get the control valve out. What I've done is that I just used a bolt, cut it down to size, and what I'll do, it's got a little tapered end which will fit in the screw hole there, and all I do is just to place a bit of tension on that, and it will spread the control fork enough to go onto the control valve. Now I've also got a little hole drilled in one end of that in there, and I'll put a bit of wire through that just to make sure that I don't drop it down into the casing. So it should be a lot easier to get back in place than it was certainly to take out. Now I've just finished reassembling the left hand side brakes. They went on okay. When you actually follow the instructions, they go on okay. The things that I had to do with the brakes was to reline them. Now I actually haven't relined brakes for 40 years. I didn't know you still did it. But yes, I bought the new linings and riveted them on. The reason I replaced them was on the left hand side about half the lining was missing, so it was easier just to replace the set. So that's been done. The other thing that I found on both sides with these pivot pins, these ones here, that the whole assemblies were loose on both sides, so they're just flopping around, which doesn't bode well for trying to adjust the brakes properly. The other problem was that the top pin here, they are actually pressed into this plate, so they shouldn't move. It was just flopping around. So not only was the whole mounting loose, but the pin was loose in the fitting itself. So what I did was just to run a little bit of a few spots of weld around and then repress it in. So that's right now. So what I need to do now is to set the brakes up. You put the pin in, you don't tighten them up straight away until you've centralised all the shoe mechanisms. So it's just a case of following what it says in the manual. Putting the springs on. If you don't have a spring tool, I imagine you would spend hours upon hours trying to get these on. They don't spread very well, and you really have to stretch them to get them down and onto the pivot pins here. So get yourself a brake tool, and then you can use the leverage of the tool to lever the springs on. So I'll just adjust this one, centralise the shoes, put it all back together, and then once I've done that, then I'll put the pedals back on, and everything should be complete at this end of the tractor.